The library of trees is what an arboretum is, and so they manage that 13-acre arboretum for us.
And you've got open pasture ground that people can just walk through and explore and look at flowers and bugs and...
Yeah, fly a kite, whatever they want to do, and come out and enjoy nature. And some of it, we have not developed all of it, you know. Some of it's for future development as we go forward.
You know, one of the things that we often find is even in a place like Iowa, people say, well, that's a rural area and people have all these open spaces, but there's a lot of folks that live in the city here. It's a decent-sized city. They have a small yard. They may not be able to explore out in nature and a pasture and trees and a pond, so this kind of opens that up for them?
That's correct, yeah. I mean, yeah. I grew up, lived in Iowa my whole life, and before I took over director, I did the environmental ed programs, and it was amazing going in the schools. Did you think living in Muscatine, which, you know, 23,000 people, everybody gets outside, but you talk to a lot of kids, they've never been outside the city limits of Muscatine and had no idea, you know, what was out there. They thought elephants, lions, and all that lived out there.
So you're happy to show them that that's not true.
That's right, and we want to show them, you know, what they can enjoy and get out of their yard and get outside. I want to see people using our trails, using our ponds. I don't want to come here and not see anybody using the things that we develop.
And what do you think is the best thing about a place like this?
Just for people to come out and enjoy themselves, you know, whatever it's going to take for them to have fun. All of us kind of, you know, have different ways of finding peace, you know, whether it's sitting on a bench or getting back into some of our primitive areas here and listening to the birds.
Thank you, Kurt. Thanks for showing us around today and letting us explore the Discovery Park here in Muscatine County. Aloha! Hawaii continues to be a top tourist destination for millions each year. And if you look closely amongst that scenic beauty, you'll find several working farms. Sarah Gardner introduces us to a farming family that's found success in palm production.
Hawaii is well known for the beauty of its blue Pacific waters and dramatic tropical landscapes. But you may not have realized that Hawaii's rich soil and year-round tropical weather also make it ideal for many farmers. And perfect for Leslie Hill and Michael Crowell. They met at the University of Hawaii's School of Agriculture. From the beginning, they knew that they wanted to farm.
Realized we were quite compatible and decided, hey, let's try farming together.
So, in 1994, they started the Wailea Ag Group on Hawaii's Big Island. In addition to flowers, citrus, and produce, they began growing something different.
Heart of palm is definitely our main crop, and it is something that we've been actually pioneering in because it was a new crop for Hawaii.
Originally grown in Central and South America, heart of palm is the tender, edible point at the growing tip of the peach palm tree. Michael and Leslie's farm is one of the largest fresh heart of palm producers in America.
We were kind of looking at the bigger picture, you know. Because there was all this empty sugarcane land, they needed new crops.
In the early 70s, Hawaiian sugarcane production declined because of cheaper labor overseas.
So they needed something else that they could grow here that would be sustainable and that future generations would be able to continue to harvest from.
But the couple's agricultural plans went well beyond their own 110 acres. They helped to jumpstart other small farms, replacing sugarcane with palm plants.
We have wanted it to become a minor industry in the state of Hawaii. We were known for our sugar, our pineapple. We're known for our Kona coffee, even the chocolate that's being produced. We should be known for our fresh Hawaiian heart of palm.
Heart of palm is a renewable and sustainable resource because it continues to produce new shoots. So harvesting doesn't harm the mother plant. Important to Michael and Leslie's view of sustainable agriculture.
We feel it's important to take care of the land. Stewardship of the land is one of our primary missions.
Harvesting this type of crop is a lot of work.
Harvesting is still done by hand, where they go out with machetes with their proper protection equipment on, of course, where they'll actually cut the palm down, cut up all the excess fronds. That all goes down in the field, and they bring those, what we call logs, into the packing shed. And from there, they're stripped down farther and then cut to size and packaged.
Shipping between 12 to 15 tons of palm a year, Heart of Palm is harvested year-round and is shipped fresh.
We're actually shipping primarily to the United States right now. At this moment in time, with the economy the way it's been, the bulk of our production is being sold locally in Hawaii at the fine dining restaurants around Hawaii. People ask us that often, what does it taste like? And I usually will just hand them a taste of it. When it's lightly cooked, heated up, it can taste a little bit like maybe a fresh sweet corn. Some people compare it to artichoke hearts. But to me, it has its own unique flavor.
The efforts to encourage new crops have helped Michael and Leslie realize that their love of farming is only a reflection of their love for the land.
You take care of the land will take care of you. So for me, this is really kind of fulfilling a dream. And we feel with the kind of crops that we planted here and the method of planting that we will be able to keep the land intact for future generations.
That's going to do it for this special edition of America's Heartland. Thanks for traveling the country with us. We're always pleased to introduce you to such interesting people and places. And don't forget, we've got a lot more to share with you online, including video from all of our shows. Just log on to americasheartland.org and stay in touch with us 24/7 through many of your favorite sites as well. We'll see you next time right here in America's Heartland.
You can see it in the eyes of every woman and man in America's heartland, living close to the land. There's a love for the country and a pride in the brand in America's heartland, living close to the land.
Carol Highsmith has been called America's photographer. She's been traveling the U.S. for more than 3 decades, taking pictures of the people and places that make America unique.
When I go out across America, what do I photograph? Everything. Someone said to me, well, why would you photograph the Golden Gate Bridge, for instance? Everybody's taking photographs of it. Yes, there will be images of the Golden Gate Bridge that may exist 500 years from now, but the ones that we know will exist in high resolution will be mine at the Library of Congress.
Highsmith is collaborating with the Library of Congress in Washington, the largest library in the world, to capture as many images as she can.
It's important that we have our beautiful scenes tucked away and a place that knows all about preservation.
Her vast collection, all copyright-free, includes many memorable images of America's national parks.
I've been to most of them, and it's everything from the spectacular and vast Grand Canyon to wintertime scenes of Yellowstone.
At Yellowstone, America's first national park, she was mesmerized by the bison.
I would say really in all the wildlife images I've taken, and I've taken a lot, the bison are the best in a sense that they look like they come from 100,000 years ago. You're looking at this vast, gorgeous landscape of Yellowstone, and the winter and the fall and the spring, and you're seeing the bison babies, you know, and all of the calves, and you just think about, will this always be?
Highsmith shoots at all hours and every weather condition, and has even had to face her fear of flying.
So I finally get to Alaska, and I'm going to Denali, and I hire a plane to take me up there. The whole way there, I'm thinking, how can I get out of this? I just say, you must do it. So I did it. But to photograph it, and then to photograph Ruth Glacier, which is huge, and to know that maybe someday it'll be gone, it was just an experience and a half.
It's that fear of iconic American landscapes and landmarks one day disappearing that motivates her.
They say Yellowstone, it could just blow up. Will the bison be there in Yellowstone? The Washington Monument. We had an earthquake here in Washington, D.C. that whole thing could have just collapsed. So I'm just there to capture it as it.
Have been especially meaningful.
So I'm at Ford's Theater 150 years after Lincoln died, right there. And there are reenactors, and there was this man who held a candle, and that's how his face was lit. I thought, whoa, you can almost feel like what it must have felt like to be there at that night. I also photographed, for instance, the coat that Lincoln wore the night he died, with his bloodstains on it. So to be close to these artifacts is just incredible.
Carol Highsmith will be remembered not only for her work, but for the singular act of generosity that has defined her career.
I'm just glad to be there. I'm glad to have this as my job.
Julie Tabo, VOA News, Washington.
There are signs Afghanistan is emerging from the darkness. Recovering from 30 years of war and repression, with a new democracy in place. But the country is still under siege from within. War with Taliban insurgents threatens the nation's security. Corruption reaches into the highest levels of government. Addiction rates rise among women and children. And a booming multi-billion-dollar illegal drug trade continues to thrive.
The amount of cultivation in Afghanistan is scary. It's actually terrifying. No other country in the world has ever produced that much narcotics.
At the center of Afghanistan's crisis, a hardy, drought-resistant crop that joins poor farmers with criminals and extremists, while pushing the nation toward the brink of disaster. In 2007, the Shinwari district returned to growing poppy.
The promises of alternative livelihoods never materialized for many. In some circumstances, household income crashed by more than 90%. People lost all productive assets. They were not able to meet basic subsistence. So it was not at all surprising, and in fact arguably inevitable, that the population went back to cultivating poppy.
The failure of the government to deliver on promises has another drawback. It undermines the authority of the elders, like Durjan, who speak on its behalf.
Many of the tribal leaders who have participated in the eradication campaign have become discredited. The population is alienated from them, they no longer trust them, and this creates key opening for the Taliban to come into the province and to mobilize.
The return of high-yield cultivation to Nangarhar means more business and profits for the traffickers.
دا دوه کارتوسه کم څلور سیره شو اوس په دغه وتوي صحیح خو دی که نه
6 months earlier, the farmer got an advance from the trafficker toward his future poppy crop. Providing credit is standard business practice and helps farmers make it through the winter. It also proves the value of opium, which generally returns 8 to 10 times more per acre than crops like wheat or rice. The trafficker comes from a long line of those who followed in their father's footsteps.
زمونږ دا کاروبار مونږ ته د ډیر پخوانه راپاتې دی یعنې د خپل پلرونو نیکونو مونږ ته په دې سره خپل ژوند په مخ بل داسې کاروبار زمونږ دپاره نشته چې مونږ یې دې ځای کې په دې منطقه کې وکړو مونږ دپاره په دې اندازه باندې مونږ ته کم عاید لاسته راشي.
With the average income less than $400 a year, for many, trafficking makes economic sense, despite the risks. The opium's freshness is judged by touch. Soft and putty-like now, it will later dry out and harden in storage, becoming more concentrated.
زمواریم تر اخیره پورې زمواریم چې په پیروي
اړول خاتمه زمونږ په کاروبار باندې اغېزه لري ځکه چې څومره چې هلته کار کمیږي هومره زمونږ دپاره عاید هم کمیږي مونږ که چېرته د قانون له حکومت د بدیل معاشیات ورکړي یعنې هغو دپاره داسې یو څه برابر کړي چې د دې کوکنارو او د دې اپین نه د هغو حاصل دې کې زیات شي او هغو ته زیاته ګټه پاتې شي نو حتما دې کان په مجبوري کې چې د اپین په ځای باندې بل څه کاروبار یعنې بل کم فصل په خپله ځمکه باندې وکړي او هغې ته توجه وکړي نو خپله قاچاقبر مجبور دی چې اپین چې د کان ونه کړي نو قاچاقبر به د کم ځای نه لاسته راوړي.
Yet for the immediate future in Nangarhar, the trafficker's job is secure. (2 a.m. in Badakhshan province, and the anti-narcotics police begin their operation. With the morning light, they arrive in a remote village. They've lost time and possibly the element of surprise. Colonel Amin Ali, head of the provincial anti-drug force, hurries with his team through the village. There's still far to go, and no certainty they'll find what they've come for. But the portable generator is a good sign. And further along the ravine, they find it. A makeshift heroin processing lab with 600 kilograms of opium ready to be processed into 75 kilograms of heroin. Wholesale value in neighboring Iran, $250,000. This time, the lab workers were tipped off and escaped, but not before converting the raw opium into a solid morphine base, the step before refining it further into heroin.
او آب انتقال میتن در این ظرف کلان آب باز میگیرن این بیلرایی را که شما میبینید در این بیلرا این آب جوش میتن بعد از اینکه این آب جوش آمد بعد از او در اینا باز دمو تریاک میندازن.
The opium dissolves into a brown liquid and ultimately becomes the morphine base. It can later be processed into various grades of heroin for smoking or injecting. Given the remote location and difficulty of the terrain, Amin will have his men pour out the liquid here and destroy any remaining raw opium or bags of chemicals. This is the 11th lab Colonel Amin and his men have raided in Badakhshan during the last year. But it's too soon. Police reports claim many other primitive heroin labs in Badakhshan. They exist because the big money's in processing.
The UN Office on Drugs and Crime has estimated in recent years that the farmers are getting from 20 to 30%, and that traffickers, corrupt officials, Taliban, and other participants in it, like people who make heroin out of opium, are getting the remaining 70 or 80%.
70 to 80% of a yearly $4 billion revenue stream is a staggering amount of money. The average per capita income in Afghanistan is under $400 a year. Few legal jobs can match the money earned in the drug trade. But efforts to stop trafficking have begun.
د هوایي ډګر د سرحدي پولیسو او د نورو نهادو ارګانونو په کومک سره بیا هم پولیسو امروز وکولی شول چې دوه کسان چې د افغانستان اوسېدونکي وو غوښتل چې د کمیر د الوتکې په ذریعه دوبۍ ته او د دوبۍ نه وروسته چین ته تقریبا په حدود 1200 کیلو هیروینو غوښتل چې د دوه بکسو کې چې ډېر په ماهرانه شکل سره ځای په ځای کړي وو غوښتل چې ولږدوي بیا هم د بیدارو پولیسو لخوا د چک په وخت کې دستګیر.
Catching drug dealers and traffickers is only part of the mission of the police. They're also trying to revamp their country's tarnished image.
لکه څرنګه چې ګران هیوادوال په دې باندې پوهیږي چې میدان هوایي و هوایي دروازه ده د افغانستان د خلکو عزت او ابرو ده چې زموږ د نړۍ سره ارتباطات تامینوي.
The next stop for these men is a date in an Afghan court.
خدمت وزیر قضایی محترم علی قایص صاحب عبدالوهاب سدید و قایص صاحب عبدالظاهر سدید در مورد قضیه قاچاق مقدار 11.10 کیلوگرم تریاک با اتهام
Typically, defendants go to trial about 2 months after arrest. But they're not the only ones whose lives hang in the balance. Outside the courtroom, judges have been threatened, abducted, or killed for doing their job.
و هر آن ما چون با قاچاقبران مواد مخدر روبرو هستیم و این کلش مجرمین سازمان یافته هستند، چون مسلک ما پیش ما مقدس است، با آن هم ما وظیفه خود همونطور به حساب با مسئولیت و با عشق علاقه انجام میدیم. توقیفیت به مدت 10 سال حبس تنفیذی و به مبلغ 700,000 افغانی جریمه نقدی محکوم به مجازات نمودیم.
While justice should be blind, it's often the small-time growers and dealers who are put in jail, caught up in the interdiction campaign.
افغانان ټول په پوي دي موږ نه واخله تر تاسو پورې له تاسو واخله بیا تر حکومت دولت ریاست جمهوریت پورې ټول په خبر دي. هرغه کسان چې دوی د قانون تشویقي اوس هم موجود دي، په کابل کې موجود دي، اعلان کې په وزارتو کې موجود دي، په چارواکو کې، په پولیسو چارواکو کې یا په وزارتي چارواکو کې دا وجود لري. هم دا اوس هم ستا په پارلمان کې دا غړي دي د افغانستان، هغوی دا تشویقي ورکوي. خو هغه کسان دي چې هغوی لاسونه اوږده دي لوی قاچاقبران په ظاهرا آزاد ګرځي.
The problem with interdiction, the way it's been carried out, is that it has targeted small traders with little political clout who have not been able to prevent arrests, whereas big traffickers with important connections to the government have been able to avoid interdiction and arrests.
At the end of the day, if you want to have success in Afghanistan or any country in getting a handle on drug trafficking, then it is very important that the cases are built against the management, against the traffickers, against the mid-level and the high-level individuals. Those people, you have to get evidence against them. They have to be arrested. They have to be formally charged in a court of law. They have to be prosecuted, convicted, and put in prison.
One high-level drug lord that was arrested wasn't tried in Afghanistan. Instead, he was turned over to federal authorities in the United States.
Haji Baz Mohammed, who was extradited Friday, is one of the world's most wanted, most powerful, and most dangerous drug kingpins.
Baz Mohammed was the first defendant the Afghan government ever extradited for drug crimes.
He pled guilty to being a manager of a heroin transportation organization through which he moved heroin from Pakistan and Afghanistan to the U.S. from 1990 through 2005. From 1994 forward, he and his organization used some of the money from the sales of the heroin in the U.S. to support the Taliban in Afghanistan. And in exchange, they received the protection of the Taliban.
Mohammed was sentenced to over 15 years in a U.S. prison, a key judgment to Boyd Johnson.
But I think it does make a difference when you take out a person the stature of Baz Mohammed. You send a message to the people of Afghanistan and to the traffickers themselves that they're not above the law.
Johnson admits that Afghanistan's judicial system has a ways to go.
I think that the corruption in Afghanistan is a significant issue. And it's not going to take a week or even a year. It's going to take a long time.
Corruption is a serious, serious problem. The police are corrupted from time to time. Local government officials are corrupted. Provincial government officials sometimes are corrupted. So it's across the board. Unfortunately, this is becoming all too common in Afghanistan society in general, but it's certainly very much there in drugs.
Newspaper editor Shukriya Barakzai is one of the members of Afghanistan's new parliament, frustrated by the all too common wrongdoing she sees.
چون اگر فساد می‌بینین در اراکین دولتی موجود هست، قاچاق مواد مخدره می‌بینین موجود هست، گریز از حسابدهی موجود هست، گریز از عدالت موجود هست و از پشت میز محکمه خب معلوم داره که یادشم نامشم بگیرین اصلا امرایتان قبول نمیکنن. چطور من میتونم که پس همی توقع رو داشته باشم که خب بیا خیر است بیادر جان هرچی که بود تیر شو اما این دفعه بیا ما تو حساب میکنیم. نه.
Afghanistan has a history of regional warlords controlling parts of the country and people having loyalty to their tribe. Barakzai believes this social and political structure hinders the growth of democracy in the country.
ما امیدوارم مردم افغانستان هم از این مصلحت‌ها دیر شوند و از خیمه‌های کونه و تنگی که دیگه به درد این ملت و به درد خودشان نمیخوره و نام قوم و زبان و مذهب خود بیرون بکشن بیاین به عنوان یک کسی که در یک سرزمین زندگی میکنه به یک تصمیم برسه که او تصمیم حاکمیت قانون، رفاه، صلح، ثبات و امنیت باشه. معلوم دار راهی که اگر امی راه 6 ساله خود لااقل ما تعقیب کنیم بریم به هیچ جای نمیرسیم.
Today, illegal processing in Afghanistan has made drugs cheaper and more available within the country. The result is that increasingly, Afghans themselves are succumbing to the dangers of the country's largest cash crop. A recent United Nations survey puts the number of heroin addicts throughout the country at 50,000. That's in addition to 150,000 people who use opium. Poverty and unemployment are two causes of drug abuse. But in Afghanistan, there's another reason.
During the past quarter century, so many conflicts against the Soviet, against one another, the Mujahideen civil war period, the Taliban rules and the fight against the Taliban, all of this has created a context whereby people, especially internally displaced people, especially refugees, finding themselves in dire conditions, and some of them started to use opium as a way of just forgetting the daily chores and the daily difficulties and tragedies in life.
Drug addiction, unfortunately, has come to Afghanistan, mainly as a consequence of our being refugees in our neighboring countries. It ruins families. It's something that worries me a lot. It's something that we have not yet done much, unfortunately.
Many of the country's addicts picked up their habit elsewhere, in neighboring Pakistan or Iran, where per capita heroin use is the highest in the world. Rabin, who struggled 12 years with addiction. His life reveals a growing trend in a country where domestic drug abuse was once virtually unknown. Realizing how his addiction affected his family, Abdurrahman quit using heroin. He is very firm about his outlook on those working in the illegal drug trade.
کسی که این کار میکنه اون اصلا مسلمان نیست، زاده این خاک نیست، بر ضد مردم، بر ضد جوانای این وطن، بر ضد جهان. طور یک ایانه که از آساما اون بدتر است.
Abdurrahman escaped from the web of addiction, but many Afghans still struggle. North of the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan is where the Central Asian steppes begin, a flat, grassy plain that stretches hundreds of miles into Russia. In Balkh province, farming and herding still prevail as a way of life. Today, the province is poppy-free, the result of the government's rigorous anti-narcotics campaign. But addiction rates are growing. And it's here where Dr. Mohammed Ehsan Hamra practices, serving some of the most remote parts of the country, where access to medical care is limited. Dr. Ehsan sees many addicts whose abuse resulted from war, displacement, or a society in chaos. However, he also encounters traditional communities where drug addiction is rampant. The UNODC estimates 1/3 of the people in this district, mostly Turkmen, are drug addicted.
بیشتر قوم ترکمن به شکل قبیلوی زندگی میکنن و از سالهای بسیار زیاد یا مصروف استعمال مواد مخدر، آن هم به خاطر کاهش دردشان است و عدم دسترسی به خدمات صحی باعث از این شده که سالهای زیاد این مردم از اوپیوم یا تریاک من حیث دوای ضد درد استفاده کنند و عامل اصلی هم من میره فکر میکنم که یا کارهای سنگینم مثل قالین بافی و چیزهای دیگه میکنن.
In a traditional village, opium addiction may look different than an urban setting. 50-year-old Najiba, a mother of 5, is a carpet weaver whose rugs are sold in shops in the provincial capital of Mazar-e Sharif, 30 miles away.
تریاک میخوریم. تریاک خوب میکنه. کمتر جمع میکنه جانای.
Opium also serves another purpose for rug weavers needing to keep their hands free of child-caring duties.
روزانه چند وقت دیوشتکتان تریاک میدین؟ 2 وقت. چی کنم؟ تریاک چی میکنی؟ خواه نمیکنه نکی. چی میکنم؟ کو بیکار آدم تیره دست بگیره ده اونجا بگرده بیکار آدم نیست کو دیگه.
از نظر ما یک تراژدی است. یک تراژدی انسانی که یک طفل هیچ گناهی نداره که او معتاد شود. او احتیاط کسب کنه. و تجربه که ما در این ساحه دارم و کارهایی که در این ساحه ما کردیم این برای من نشان داده که مادرها و عدم آگاهی از ضرر مواد مخدر یا از ضرر تریاک یا اوپیوم و اونمو هست که طفل که هیچ گناهی نداره و گناهی از اونمو هست که جامعه فقیری مثل افغانستان، جامعه که سطح آگاهی مردم آنقدر بلند نیست که از ضرر مواد مخدر بفهمند که اولاد خود که بسیار دوست داشتنی می باشند و زندگی راحت داشته باشند، زندگی عاری از مواد مخدر داشته باشند.
Begun in childhood, or later to alleviate work-related pain, opium addiction often continues into old age. While illegal opium is a threat within Afghanistan, it's also a threat to the world community, and solutions must extend beyond Afghanistan's borders. Reducing worldwide demand is one solution.
If you eradicated every opium poppy in Afghanistan, you would still have drugs on the streets of my constituency and, you know, in small-town America. What we have to do is we have to focus on dealing with demand for drugs and not just seeing it as a question on the supply side.
If you look at any success story in the world on fighting drugs, you have to reduce demand in the countries that have the demand while simultaneously cutting off the supply.
Meanwhile, as the insurgency continues in the country, efforts to curb the drug trade have yet to produce results. A UN assessment for 2008 found opium cultivation at virtually the same levels as the record-breaking harvest in 2007. Welcome news for traffickers in the country.
دتی واړه کچاکبرانی مونږ د طالبانو د حکومت یعنی هغو سره مونږ کوم ارتباط نه لرو نو په دې خاطر باندې مونږ په دې باندې مطمئن چې دا کوکنار به تر ډیر وخته پورې زموږ کاروبار به هم د دې کوکنارو تر موجودیت پورې دا هم ادامه پیدا کوي.
There's agreement Afghanistan's illegal drug trade slows the country's progress toward becoming a stable, economically independent democracy. But there's not agreement on how best to deal with the poppy problem, or how long it will take.
Putting an end to the opium cultivation in Afghanistan is going to take a very long time. Perhaps 20 years, perhaps 25 years. But we have to start, and we are starting now.
It took almost 30 years for Afghanistan to get into the condition that it's in now. It will take a long time to rebuild the institutions, the trust among people, and the basic functionings of the economy.
I think it's totally wrong to say that we are losing Afghanistan. There's a risk of that. But people who know Afghanistan see there's a lot of hope in that country too. And what we need is perseverance, political will. We need to recognize it's going to take some time to do this, and then we can do it.
Was music to Anna's ears. And that's English in a Minute.
Voice of America and the Clyde's Restaurant Group in Washington, D.C. bring you live from the Hamilton. Performances showcasing musicians and the many genres of music born in America and enjoyed around the world.
When people ask us if we're sisters, we look at each other and we say, probably. The universe put us together. So the creative process is as diverse and dynamic as the music itself. Music is the universal language because it's so embedded in every part of our lives. So we watch a movie, it has music. You're in the store, music is playing. You go to the club, music is playing. You're in church, music is playing.
You're in the elevator, music is playing.
So it's such a natural part of our lives that it makes sense that it transcends like
language and word.
Because it's natural. It's how you learn. It's how you learn your ABCs through music. It's just a natural expression of human beings. It's been happening for thousands and thousands of years, and it's one of the most beautiful expressions, I believe, and that's why it's so transcendent. First of all, hello to everyone in the world who is watching us right now. We love you. We don't know you, but we love you. And that's the same way music makes people feel. You don't know where that person's from, but you love what they're playing, and you love how it makes you feel.
Thank you so much.
VOA presents the following National Geographic program as we continue to explore the world around us.
The times we live in today are radically different from those of the young Ansel Adams. Does it still hold true that art and nature can be inspirational? I believe there will always be the human need for affirmation and inspiration of the kind immortalized by Adams in his photographs. Our spirits, our own inner beauty, spring from the same source as these rocks, trees, and reflecting waters. Tonight, we're going to talk about a place, sort of the different components about this place. The first is the actual physical geography of it. It was designated one of the first wilderness areas when the Wilderness Act was passed. Most of this wilderness is in the higher elevation, what they call the High Sierra. The second part I wanted to talk about was the early work of Ansel Adams that's associated with this particular area. This was where Ansel Adams developed his love of nature, was an employee with the Sierra Club, and kind of where he mastered his craft of photography. The third part, I wanted to try and show some of my work, how he influenced me. This was a picture that I took in 1977. I had read a lot of the Ansel Adams basic manuals and sort of learned a lot about photography and the love of landscape photography from reading those Ansel Adams books. And then the fourth part was the new work that I've done, this landscape series. This picture I just took, but we're sort of in a helicopter hovering over June Lake and looking back, and up the snowy part in the back there is the Ansel Adams wilderness. So I just had a few of the color pictures. This is the most remote area in the North Fork of the San Joaquin River. The year that I was there, it had almost 50 feet of snow. And the mountain in the foreground there is Mount Ansel Adams. There's actually also a mountain named after him. What's unique about a lot of the Ansel Adams wilderness is metamorphic rock. There's this one little area that's not the typical granite that you find in a lot of the Sierras. And this amazing water, the very clean, crystal clear blue water, Dana Lake. And the storms that come from the Pacific, and then they hit the mountains and form these afternoon thunderstorms. And of course the water is the main theme. It's the Rainbow Falls and the forest. This is one area There's aspens, also a lot of evergreens. So I wanted to give a little bit of the history of how Ansel Adams got involved with this area. This is a picture of his father on the left and his mother, and Ansel when he was 14 years old, and his aunt. And this is his first trip to Yosemite. And in his autobiography, Ansel Adams said if he was a kid today, he would be described as an ADD child. Whatever it was, he didn't do well in school, and his father took him out of school in the 8th grade and gave him some private tutoring and bought him a piano, and he gave him some piano lessons, and he sort of took to that, but he also gave him a Brownie camera and went to Yosemite, and he kind of fell in love with the place. And by the time he was about 20 years old, he had gotten this job as a caretaker of the LeConte Memorial, which is sort of the stone house that was sort of the clubhouse of the Sierra Club in Yosemite Valley. It's still there. And he also started going on trips. He bought his own burro to carry his camera equipment. And that's kind of the way they did it back then. And he was one of the early rock climbers. The man on the left is David Brower, who was the longtime head of the Sierra Club. And back then they wore kids' tennis shoes and just tied a rope together. And they said if one person fell, all it meant is that both of them would die. There was no security or anything. It was pretty precarious at times. But this is like 1930s. But his job was to sort of be the logistics person for these summer high Sierra trips, they call them. And it was primarily well-to-do businessmen from San Francisco who really liked the Sierras, and they would take a whole month off, and they would come and basically camp out in the high Sierras. And amazingly, Adams would take care of everybody, but he would get up early in the morning and take pictures. And so a lot of the pictures that I'll show you were taken actually during these one-month trips. So he came of age in the era of pictorialism. And this picture was one of his very first. It looks kind of strangely modern now, sort of a selective focus. Pictorialism was seen as sort of an imitation of painting, and that's eventually what people like Adams sort of rebelled against. We actually know now that even before that, it was the painters who sort of copied the camera obscura, which is a form of photography. So that's sort of what really happened. But in this era, they used a lens that induced these spherical aberrations and made sort of a soft focus and was seen as sort of imitation of painting. But he soon switched, and this is one of his first kind of straight pictures. And during this time, they used glass plates, and the emulsions were only sensitive to blue light. So all the skies would turn this sort of white color, and it kind of gave an atmospheric effect. But in 1923, they switched to the emulsions where you could actually photograph by moonlight, longer exposures. And then the big advance was you could actually photograph clouds, which was a real important part of the Sierras, this afternoon clouds that build up in the summertime. So also it seemed to me in reading about it, there was this big change sort of in his intellectual thinking. He went from sort of being the school brat to writing things like this. This is some of his words from 1923. He said, "I was climbing the long ridge west of Mount Clark. I was suddenly arrested in the long, crunching path by an exceedingly pointed awareness of the light. I saw more clearly than I've ever seen, before or since, the minute detail of the grasses, the small flotsam of the forest, the motion of the high clouds streaming above the peaks. I dreamed that for a moment time stood quietly, and the vision became but a shadow of an infinitely greater world." So the other thing that I thought was sort of interesting was he had a belief that dead trees were more expressive than live ones. So he took quite a few pictures of dead trees. This is kind of a hostile environment when you get into high elevations. So this is a foxtail pine. May have been dead for 100 years or so. It just stays there. But he also embraced not only a rejection of pictorialism, but this embrace of modernism. Alfred Stieglitz had a saying that said, art should be the affirmation of life. And that's throughout his whole career, he always hung to that it should be affirming. He also had a belief, he called it extracts. He didn't like if somebody called this picture abstract. He thought that the role of the photographer was to extract a part of nature. He called it to make form from shapes. He thought all nature was just shapes and it was up to the artist to make form out of it and to extract. And so this was sort of a radical view for the time. If you think of a picture like this, compare it to the 19th century photographers who were survey photographers would go out, and their job was mainly to go out west, survey, take these pictures and come back east and show people what was out there. But Adams really thought that you should sort of project your emotional state, feelings toward the environment or toward the landscape. And there's a little bit of a story behind this picture. It's called the Michael Minaret. And one of those well-to-do early Sierra Club members was named Walter Starr. And he had a son who was an avid climber, and he liked to climb solo. And unfortunately, he fell to his death on this Michael Minaret. And so he asked Ansel Adams if he would put together a book of his best pictures of the John Muir Trail, because his dream was to write a guidebook of the John Muir Trail, which still exists. It's called The Star's Guide to John Muir Trail. So that was what made this book happen in 1938. And it's really the only book that's totally written by Ansel Adams and has 50 of his photographs. The book was sold for $15 at the time, which was quite a bit, and there was only 500 copies. So this whole early work was from the period of around 1920 to 1938. And then after that, World War II came about, and Ansel Adams had this idea that he would try and do pictures of all the beautiful places in the America to make people feel patriotic about their country. So he got a commission called the Mural Project, and he bought this car, which he called Helios, and he turned in the burro for the car and got the large format 8x10 camera and did a lot of the pictures that he's really famous for. In some ways, they're a grander scope, I think, than the earlier work. He also got a Guggenheim Fellowship to photograph the national parks, Mount McKinley, and probably one of his more famous, Clearing Winter Storm in Yosemite. So I kind of moved to the third part to show you some of my early work. This was a picture that I took in 1975. I took a photo class when I was a senior in high school, and I had a really good photography teacher, and we actually went on a field trip up to Yosemite, and this was really one of my first pictures. It was taken, I had bought a 4x5 camera with black and white, and I went to Death Valley because that was another one of Ansel Adams' favorite hangouts, and this was sort of a detail that I tried. And when I look at these pictures, they're not anything that I've, sold or think are my best work, but it really makes me feel that this was the type of work that I was originally drawn to, the landscape of the Western U.S. So what I did, sort of naively, I was just the first year in college, and I'd only been photographing for a year or two. I wrote to Ansel Adams and asked if I could come show him my portfolio up in Carmel. And to my surprise, he wrote a letter back, which is, I learned that he wrote over 100,000 letters in his life, and he had a philosophy that he always answered every letter, and that anybody that wanted to come see him could come at 5 o'clock. He had a cocktail hour at that time. And you could, as long as he had his drink, and he would talk to you. So I actually went there, and he signed my book. This was in 1977. And one thing that I remember from it succinctly was when he looked at this picture, he said that he thought that I should crop it differently. And he said that it's real important along the edges to always have the clean edges. So he said to kind of go like that. It's a very small difference. But if you look, it sort of makes it a little cleaner along the edges. So I think that's sort of the modernism eye that he had through all his work. And if you, any young photographer, you really can't go wrong learning that. It's kind of like, you know, learning classical music or something. It's timeless. And his work sort of stands because of the way he did his compositions. So what happened after that was I went to journalism school at University of Missouri and was selected as a summer intern and started doing some stories for the Geographic. And this was one of the first ones that was on the California Desert Protection Act. So I felt like this was back sort of in the old stomping grounds of the California desert. I'm trained as a photojournalist, but I've used landscape photography in a lot of stories. And this is in Grand Canyon. There's not too many journalists who kind of have a background in landscape photography. This is a story about the Wilderness Act, the wilderness system. And this is up in Alaska, up in the Tracy Arm Wilderness. And this is way up in Devon Island. Some of these people go up there to study about going to Mars, and a high elevation impact crater. One of my favorite places is down in Torres del Paine National Park in Patagonia, and way down in Tierra del Fuego. This was a story about the anniversary of Darwin's expedition on the Beagle. Darwin went to this Pia Bay, and we did a story about the 40th anniversary of the National Trails System. This was the Ozark Highland Trail in Fraser Island, Australia, Finland, the Kulanka National Park. There's a moonlight that they call the candlelight spruce. This was actually for a story on the carbon cycle, how the carbon in the calcium carbonate in the shales. So these pictures sort of all had a journalistic side to them. This was a story about the climate change. This is in Switzerland, sort of the melting glacier, the bathtub ring, the drying Lake Powell. And again, you can see the bathtub ring in the desert. Called this Viking weather because Greenland was getting warmer, and it was why the Vikings had to leave, and it got colder. And I've also used it on some environmental stories, story about hard rock mining. This was a Superfund site, water pollution in China, even in a Home Depot parking lot in Baltimore. This is we're talking about the non-point source water pollution that runs off the parking lot into the Chesapeake Bay. And these are depleted uranium canisters of nuclear waste from Paducah. The oil sands, all the scraping of the boreal forest for the oil. And this is for the drought, sort of a landscape of a marina where there's no boats or no water. And the Yoho National Park, just the other side of the Rockies from Banff and Lake Louise. And so really. Okay, so now we get sort of to the last part. I've just tried to explain a little bit of some of the creative process about this story that I went through. This was the lead picture that was in the Geographic article. And I went through kind of a lot of thought about how to do this, how to sort of do a tribute and sort of show that I had really been inspired by Ansel Adams, but not sort of copy it or not do what sometimes is called stand in the same tripod holes as Ansel and stuff like that. So the first thing I had to decide was whether to do it in black and white or color. And if you shoot in digital, you have a raw file and you can make it color or black and white. I really liked the way the black and white, the granite just seemed to really come out much more forceful, and the sculptural qualities. To me, it really was the right way to do it. But then I still had to kind of figure out, I didn't want to do it exactly like Ansel Adams had shot, 75 years ago. So I just kind of came up with this idea of sort of referencing some of his pictures for people who were real fans of his work. They could look at it and sort of see that there was a connection, but also see that it was a little bit more up-to-date version of it. The other thing I did was a lot of nature books are divided by the seasons, and we decided to just do it by the type of scenery that you would see if you went there, just so you'd sort of focus on, instead of just, you know, the summertime or a vacation, it would be like you're looking at certain peaks or lakes and things. These are kind of the peaks and the lakes. This again, that's the black and white, the Ansel Adams, Mount Ansel Adams. It's called Cabin Lake. This was another one of those that when you looked at it in color, it was actually taken before sunrise. And it was actually sort of flat, but when they're all the same tone in black and white, it brings out the granite. And I was surprised to actually see little white caps. This is up about 10,000 feet, so about a 30-mile-an-hour wind. There's also what's called the Sierra High Trail. It sort of follows the John Muir Trail, which is this 211-mile trail through the Sierras. And someone came up with an idea to sort of go that same route but not have any trail. And so this is the part it's called Nancy Pass, and you actually, with your pack and everything, it's sort of a scramble to get up there, but it had a nice view of the minarets. Another thing that Ansel Adams had this philosophy that climbing to the top of the mountain, you don't get the best view. And the very bottom of the mountain, you don't get the best view, but you sort of get the best view part way up. And so that's what this was, sort of about a third way. Some of the meadows. These are trees that have been pushed over by the heavy snow and a lot of avalanches that can take place. This was sort of an idea I had of referencing back to some of Adams' work. He took pictures of similar subject matter. And this is in the water. Wilderness area is very important for the state of California because the watershed, one side comes all the way down and ends up being the drinking water for Los Angeles, and the other side, this is the San Joaquin River. This flows down into the Central Valley, and this is the water that's used for the irrigation. This water ends up, 60% of it ends up watering lawns in Los Angeles. There's one area on the east side, and it actually started snowing. I went there for the fall colors, and the fall colors weren't even out yet, so I ended up coming back a little bit later. This is a Sierra juniper, the largest trees in the wilderness. This was shot by moonlight. It's the kind of picture that was really only possible with a digital sensor. That's why I really thought that digital was the best way to do a story like this, because I think if Ansel Adams were alive now, he would be using the latest technology. I actually always thought of fall colors as color photographs, but I really more and more like the way they photograph in black and white. On the right side is sort of between the orange and the yellow, you get just a slight delineation in the print. This is the creek that comes out of Parker Lake. And I did go there in the winter. This was actually when I went on the fall trip, when it started sleeting on those same aspen trees. I think we were probably the only people in the wilderness in this time in February. We had to do what's called this all-terrain skiing, which is a sort of a hybrid of cross-country and downhill skiing. And I timed it to go in during a storm, which turned out to be good for photographs, but sort of difficult to move around. So we saw this is what they call a Sierra wave cloud. And this kind of means, uh-oh, you know, when you see it's about a 50-mile-an-hour wind up on this Mount Lyell there. And I could just barely stand up taking this picture, holding the tripod down. And then it got even worse. And then it got even worse than that. And this was about 70-mile-an-hour winds, and we ended up having to dig a snow cave, which is something I'd never done, and I was glad I had the people with me that knew how to do that. So we stayed in there for 2 nights, and I actually just climbed out long enough to take this picture. It's about 50 feet away from the opening of the snow cave. And that's about all we could go. It's really like a whiteout conditions. I wanted to see what it looked like afterwards, so when we got back out, I hired a plane and took some pictures from the air. So I wrote an afterword, so I just wanted to read a little bit about that. So, the times we live in today are radically different from those of the young Ansel Adams who photographed the Sierra wilderness. Times were hard in the 1920s and 1930s, but Americans believed that things would get better and progress would come.